Mongoose Jake here with next video in the Retaliator, the Sonic Ice Retaliator build series. And I'm just going to bring you up to speed. As you can see, here's the spring sitting out. I've already removed all the screws and pulled the blaster apart, took the spring out, and gotten to this point so that we can have a little shorter video. So quite simply, I'm going to take it apart, and I also went ahead and took my alloy bolt sled, attached the upgraded worker breech, and these do come with a air restrictor in them. It's a small one, but if you're wanting max performance, it has a dart post built into it, and it is just simply a airflow restrictor. It's not the Nerf style. It's feels 3D printed. It's got a little texture to it, and it's just slid in there. It's slid down in the breech, and all you have to do to get it removed is to put a screwdriver down the back. Be careful to not damage the breech, and I just tapped on it by hand. It's not glued in or anything. So just make sure to pop that out. I did it off camera, and since I already had this opened up, basically what we're going to do is remove everything that's not necessary. So I'm going to pull out the stock trigger. I'm going to set my upgraded bolt sled off to the side, and I use one of the magnetic bowls to keep all my springs, and I've got the little end strike rail attachment point there. Now we're going to remove the rest of these parts. There's the stock catch, the stock plunger and plunger tube, which I will be reusing the stock plunger tube. Nothing wrong with it. It's a fine plunger tube. Let's remove the locks here. No need for that anymore. No need for that either. The only thing that you can leave is, of course, your magazine catch. Take all the rest of the locks out. And here is the stock bolt sled. I'm going to show you here just with my two fingers. Very flimsy. Very flimsy. This won't handle too much more than, long term, it won't handle too much more than 7 kilograms. That's why Orange Mod Works and Worker always made their upgrade springs at about 7 kilograms. That's about the maximum they can handle, because it feels very light duty. And I mean, the breech is even a 2-piece unit that's been clicked in and solvent welded. It's not even a 1-piece unit like this is here. As you see, that is a 1-piece tube. So 1 piece is always stronger than 2 that are joined. So already, noticeably better. And of course, that alloy bolt sled can handle a huge load. Okay, now coming back after the initial segment, let's get this thing to where it can actually function and fire. Now, what I need to do at this point is, Worker sends with their spring kits, they send their own little light lube, or you can use some of this fantastic Orange Mod Works white lithium grease. I'm going to use the white lithium grease, and I'm going to use the Worker. This is heavier. The Orange Mod Works grease is heavier. The Worker comes in almost like the old Carmex, the old-fashioned Carmex lip balm. That's what it reminds me of. This is lighter and a little bit, it's more of a solid at room temperature. This I'm going to use inside of my plunger tube. You don't want a heavy lubricant on your plunger tube. If you do, it will actually cause drag. So just take a little bit, wipe it in here. This is me prepping it for reassembly. I'm going to wipe it all over the plunger tube. Again, I'm not going with a thick layer. I just want a layer, period. Just something on there, so it's not a dry surface. Because a lot of times Nerf doesn't lubricate these at all, so it's just a dry surface, dry plastic surface against your O-ring. Now, speaking of the O-ring, this is where I will use a little bit of the Orange Mod Works. And by a little bit, I mean a tiny amount. You do not want to overdo that. We're going to put a thin layer around the breech seal. Just a very thin layer, just enough to, again, we don't want it to be dry. See, that's a little bit, not excessive. You just don't want it to be dry. So we're going to do that. Now, I am going to use the worker plunger. And actually, now that I got my plunger tube in, the worker kit comes with its own plunger cushion. I'm going to go ahead and plop that down. You can just push it in there. You put the flared end towards the opening of the plunger tube. So if you were to picture it, flare goes this way. It's flared that way. It provides good impact cushion. And if you want to make sure it's placed in properly, just take your plunger, tap it in a little bit. Something else that Worker provides are these little buffer stops. They're rubber, and you place them in your Retaliator shell. Look for that little tab right there. You place it in there. It's got a notch in it that lines up with a tab that's in the shell. So I'll take the other one. All this is to prevent any harsh slamming of the plunger tube due to the movement of the plunger. And you're going to be, putting in this case, a 9 kilogram spring. So anything you can do to soften the impact on the plastic shell is important, because plastic has a fatigue life. I mean, all materials do, but plastic's fatigue life is far, far shorter than, say, metal. Okay, so what I've done is I've gotten my bolt sled and plunger tube lubricated. Need to get the plunger and put on O-ring. Now again, with the O-ring, make sure it's got a good fit. This is one that came with my one of my kits here. I've forgotten which one came with what. But we're going to take that test of the fit. Fits good. As I would expect, I've been highly pleased with all Worker products so far. Again, I'm going to use Orange Modworks lithium grease for my O-ring. And all I'm going to do is kind of bathe it in the lithium grease. Get a coating everywhere. As you can see, I had it with a blue O-ring. It's all over it, but it's all over it in a thin layer. I keep mentioning that. It's important. Too much lithium grease, I'm putting a little more on, but too much, like if this thing was sitting here just absolutely coated in white all of a sudden, that's too much. You'll cause drag inside of your plunger tube. There we go. Just enough to keep it from being dry, because that bare friction would wear on it. Okay, so plunger into plunger tube. Slide that into let that hook into the bolt sled. Okay, and drop all that in. Those bumpers make a really nice cushion there for the plunger tube. Okay, check everything. Everything works well. I'm actually going to use the slightly heavier lithium grease. I'm going to put just a small amount on my slide. Just a small amount. Actually, now that I think about it, I might want to use the Worker instead. It's more clear. I mean, they're both lubricants, so let's use the one that doesn't cake up in white. Because the Orange Modworks lubricant is, well, it's white. That'll show through. Now that I think about it, it's going to show through the shell. And all I'm doing is looking to make sure that the slide has a nice smooth travel instead of just riding on rough plastic on metal with nothing. I want to I want to make sure this thing has a good feel to it as it's being primed. So I'm going to coat the bolt sled with a nice layer. This is a heavier layer than I would have put on any of the internal parts, where we're actually relying on a good air seal, because there you just put enough just to get an air seal. Okay. Now that it's all lubricated, let's drop this in here. Get that plunger tube lined up. Get everything in place. Make sure that's sliding fine. Okay. Push that forward. Okay, so far so good. Now, we get the catch. Let's stick the catch in. The catch comes with the spring pre-installed, and that is a very heavy spring. Let's see how well I can get it in place. Okay, it's in. Now those bumpers, I have not used those worker bumpers before. Okay, they will actually allow the plunger tube to go in place without interfering with the catch. That was a concern of mine. I'm actually going to take a quick look here. Okay, that's some tight tolerances, but it works. The worker metal catch actually rides over the top of the plunger tube just fine, because those bumpers do move the plunger tube back just a little, and I was worried about that. And I know we're going a little long on this video, but if you don't like lengthy videos, I'm not going to apologize. Now, my Orange ModWorks trigger. Now it does not come with its own spring, so you reuse the spring from the trigger. And if I drop that in place, it's got a fairly positive trigger. It's sometimes now that they're including a little heavier spring. And something that I was considering doing is I keep spare springs of other types. Like these came out of something completely different, and I'm actually going to, if I don't catch it on the other spring, I'm going to slip it on over. This is something I've done with other blasters. It's just a little extra spring tension. There's not really a functional benefit to this. It's more of personal taste. I like a more responsive trigger. I get that stuff down in there. Try to use a small screwdriver to line that up. And it's not a drastic change, but a little extra spring tension makes the heavier trigger a little more responsive. And I personally like that. So now, we've got everything in place, aside from that 9 kilogram spring. Now, here's the stock spring. There's the 9 kilo spring. Much heavier duty. Now, what I'm not going to try to do is to reassemble the blaster with the spring fully in. I'm going to get it started. And the trick is, go ahead and reassemble the blaster and then push this thing in. So that's what we're going to do now. We got everything out. The only two pieces that I'm going to reuse, I'm not reusing any of the locks. I'm going to try to figure out, this is that little dart storage bit. Let's see which way it goes. Alright. Okay, the other way. There we go. Plop that back in place. Take the little end strike rail, little knob. That's the rail stop, I guess you'd say. Those things are always a little bit of a pain to put back in. So we're gonna Plop that in. Stay. The blaster looks like it's together, so I'm going to place a couple of screws in key spots. And I'm not going to make you suffer through me putting this back together. But what I will show is then work the spring in through. You notice I put one screw at the front. So we're going to push this back in. Right here. Voila. Okay. Now, we've got that in. It's there. And to help hold it together, I'm not reusing the Nerf stock attachment point. But what I am going to do is just to put it on there. You see me take the screws away. Frees up my hand. So I'm going to tighten this all back down. I'll cycle it through a few times, make sure it all works, and then I'll come back to you guys.